Everybody for coming back for our second episode. My name is Ashley O'Hara. I am the curator at the Crested Butte Museum, and welcome to our second episode of Colorado History with Dr. Duane Vandenbusche. I would like to start the evening once again by giving a land acknowledgement. The museum recognizes that we are guests here on this land in historically Ute territory. We acknowledge that the Uncompahgre Ute and the Tabewash Ute were forcibly removed from this area due to the Bruneau Treaty. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor, the Ute Museum, located in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with the Ute Tribes by History Colorado, our state historic society. While we could never do this history justice, we do include information about Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, the Bruneau Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. Other ways to support Indigenous peoples of today and the past is to go beyond land acknowledgements, and please consider taking steps towards allyship and reconciliation by conducting your own research of Indigenous groups that were forcibly removed from your own community, visiting local Indigenous museums, cultural centers, and reading literature from Indigenous writers. We hope that you will consider becoming members of the museum or making a donation to support this program and all the work we do here at the museum. You can do that by visiting our website at crestedbuttemuseum.com or giving us a call at the museum at 970-349-1880. We are still offering walking tours this fall every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. If you'd like a private tour for 3 or more people, you can call the museum and schedule that. If you have any questions about our programming, visit crestedbuttemuseum.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, or sign up for our newsletter. We also do list our events in the newspaper. And I just want to thank our lead sponsors, Western Colorado University Foundation and Bill Petros. Just so you know, we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk, and please post them in the chat box, not the Q&A, so I can see them appropriately. And yeah, we'll hand it off to you, Duane.
Thank you, Ashley, and welcome everybody. It's great to have all of you on board tonight. As all of you know, and I mentioned this last time, I'm a great supporter of the Crested Butte Museum and Western. And I hope that all of you consider a contribution to the Crested Butte Museum or to my scholarship fund at Western to benefit needy students. To donate to the museum, go to crestedbuttemuseum.com, or to donate for a scholarship, go to westernup.org. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Mesa Verde, a little about the Ute Indians, and also about Spain and Colorado. This is the second of 11 sessions. Every Thursday at 7 o'clock. We will have a trivia question at the end for one of my books. And Ashley will tell you at the end again how to go ahead and answer the question. Next week, we are going to talk about the fur trading frontier, 1807 to 42, and the era of the mountain men, the great explorers that passed through Colorado, and then the great surveys of the American West. First scientific look at the West, a lot of it dealt with the Gunnison country. But tonight, we're going to talk about a great mystery, and that is the mystery of the people of Mesa Verde. High above a valley floor in remote southwestern Colorado is a flat tableland. In later years, the Spanish called the river that ran through it the Rio de la Mancos, or the River of the Cripples. Spain referred to the tableland above the valley floor as Mesa Verde, which means green table. Mesa Verde is located between Cortez and Durango, off of Highway 160, and it rises 2,000 feet from the valley floor below. It is 15 by 20 miles in area, 300 square miles. Rugged canyons and the Mancos River run through it. Long before any white man ever set foot on the mesa, a great Native American civilization flourished and then died. No knowledge or philology. Philology is the folk spirit of a people, their language, their customs, music, and art, ever passed to the cliff dwellers' successors on the mesa. There is no link between them. There are many theories on how people originated on the American continent. Sometime in the past, perhaps 15 to 25,000 years ago, it is thought, Mongolians, driven out of their land by hunger or tougher tribes, left and crossed the Bering Strait, 55 miles on the ice, and entered North America. There's also the theory of continental drift, which is pretty well accepted today, that states that the continents were then joined together, which have meant a land bridge, and they could have walked over from Mongolia to Alaska. Nomadic and faced with conquering a strange environment and wild animals, the Mongolians struggled to survive as they made their way south through America. There's good evidence to support this theory on how people came to America. The biggest is the prominent nose the Mongolians had and the prominent nose that the Native Americans had a little later on. Another theory involves the great Norwegian navigator Thor Heyerdahl. Following the end of World War II in 1947, Heyerdahl attempted to prove that some of the people who came to America came from the South Sea Islands of the Pacific. In 1947, in a huge raft that he called Kon-Tiki, based on some of the ships that they had in the South Sea Islands many years before, Heyerdahl left Easter Island area and landed on the west coast of Chile, proving that it was possible for the Asians to have been first in America. In the early 1960s, Heyerdahl was at it again, this time trying to prove that the greatest sailors of all time, the Phoenicians, who live where Lebanon is today in the Middle East, could have been the first to come here. Heyerdahl made a boat out of papyrus reeds, just like the Phoenicians, and set out from the eastern Mediterranean Sea, crossed the Mediterranean, went through the Straits of Gibraltar, across the Atlantic Ocean, landing somewhere near San Salvador in the Caribbean. And the Phoenicians could have done it. They were the first to sail at night, first to sail by dead reckoning, first to use the sextant, and they guarded the secrets of their trade routes very carefully. Another theory involved the great civilization of China, and there is some evidence that Chinese ships called junks came to the west coast of California thousands of years ago. Some of the Native Americans, or Indians as Columbus called them, he called them that because he thought he had landed in India, changed from a nomadic to an agricultural existence. The arrival of the Native Americans at Mesa Verde in the Four Corners area probably coincided with the Christian era of Europe around the birth of Jesus Christ. The Four Corners region of southwest Colorado, northwest New Mexico, northeast Arizona, and southeast Utah included a tremendously high and complex civilization dating back over 1,000 years. In Colorado, that civilization is called Mesa Verde. In Arizona, Kayenta. In New Mexico, Chaco Canyon. And in Utah, Hovenweep. Later Indians or Native Americans referred to those who preceded them in the Four Corners area as, quote, those who have vanished, unquote, or the ancient ones, or the Anasazi. The natives of Mesa Verde passed through 4 well-defined chronological eras before leaving their complex civilization around the year 1300. The first era was the Basketmaker Era, which ran from approximately 1 to 450, about the time of birth of Jesus Christ to the end of the Roman Empire and world history. During that time, the yucca plant was used to make baskets. The Indians had no knowledge of pottery, so the baskets, coated with pitch on the bottom, held water and allowed soup to be cooked by heated stones put in the bottom of the basket. The Indians then lived in caves. They used the atlatl for hunting. That was a device that held a spear. It wasn't very effective because one had to be practically eyeball to eyeball with next to a deer or an elk to throw it and kill the animal. Animal skins were used for warmth in the caves, and a metate or grinding stone was used to grind grain and make flour. Religion was very primitive, with the dead being buried with possessions they would need in the afterlife. However, during the Basketmaker era, even though primitive, 2 important things occurred. One was the Neolithic Revolution, when the Indians settled down in one spot and stopped wandering. They ceased to be nomadic. The other development was creating an agricultural society with planting, cultivation, and storage of crops, along with irrigation being used. The second era was the modified Basketmaker Era, which ran from 450 to 750, roughly the end of the Roman Empire to the Frankish Empire in Europe. During this era, three modifications or changes came at Mesa Verde. One was that the natives learned how to fire clay and create pottery, which now replaced the baskets, allowing for greater storage of water and other uses. The second was the coming of the bow and arrow. That replaced the atlatl and made hunting far more effective. And the third was the coming of the pit house. The Indians now left their caves and built pit houses on top of Mesa Verde, a huge hole 5 feet deep, 10 to 20 feet in diameter, with logs and reeds and mud as the roof with an air hole on top. Dozens of remains of pit houses exist on top of Mesa Verde today. The Indians still use the metate and the grinding stone, used to grind grain. And that became a real problem for the natives later in life because the sand from the grinding stone wore their teeth down to the gums after a decade of eating. The third era in Mesa Verde development was the Developmental Pueblo Era. That ran roughly from 750 to 1100, from the Frankish Empire in Europe to about the rise of towns and trade in Western Europe and world history. The word Pueblo means town or village in Spanish and meant that the people of Mesa Verde were now establishing villages on top of the mesa. The era of the pit houses now waned, and complex multiple units came all over the top of the mesa and all over the Four Corners area. This move suggested population expansion and also peace because all of the units were unprotected. The first construction of the pueblos was adobe, but fine masonry soon took over. Some of the pueblos were 2 stories high and all had kivas, a religious ceremonial chamber. Thus, the third period saw a move from the pit house to the pueblo. The last era in Mesa Verde development was the classic Pueblo era from 1100 to about 1300. That coincided with the rise of towns and trade in Europe to the beginning of the Renaissance. The word classic roughly means the best of its kind. So this era was the height of Mesa Verde history, the climax of over 1,000 years of history, from a simple agricultural civilization to a complex one was now at hand. During this 200-year period, a very high type of architecture came. Villages became larger, some rising to 3 and 4 stories high. The ruins of the Far View House shows an integrated complex of living and storage rooms, kivas, wall courts, and towers. Farming became more sophisticated. Crops were grown on top of the mesa, in terraced ravines dropping off the mesa, and in the valley floor below. Irrigation was used, and today's satellite photos show the remains of ditches and reservoirs which existed a long time ago. The crops that were raised during the classic Pueblo era were corn, beans, squash, and gourds. Trade also went on to the south and west, perhaps all the way to California. Cotton, salt, seashells, and turquoise were acquired through trade. Commerce with other people existed, but we know little about it. The Mesa Verde people never had a system of writing, had no horses or livestock, and never developed a wheel, and used no metals. During this time, the population drew together and declined. Pueblo dwellings became much larger, and tall round towers were built. This suggested a need for defense. Then came the most startling innovation of them all. The Pueblo Indians deserted the mesa top and built pueblos in caves in the walls of the canyons. 600 to 800 separate cliff dwellings show the magnificence of the migration. It was here within the confined caves that the Pueblo builders produced their architectural masterpieces, the Spruce Tree House, the Square Tower House, and the most marvelous of them all, the famous Cliff Palace. The Cliff Palace contained more than 200 rooms, forming a city alone. It was built in terraces, rising 3 and 4 stories in places, with 23 kivas and housing for more than 200. As big and magnificent as it was still dwarfed by the famed Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, which was 4 times the size of the Cliff Palace. The quality of the masonry and the interior plastering and painting of the walls in red and white show a refinement beyond anything known before. Defense had now become a necessity, with the cliff dwellings providing security. Some danger not present earlier now threatened the mesa dwellers. No one really knows what the danger was. Perhaps raids by nomadic tribes or civil conflict. Most of the people of Mesa Verde and Anasazi continued to live in valleys and mesas. Only a small minority lived in the walls of canyons. Whatever the concentration of pueblos, it was the beginning of the end for Mesa Verde. For a few generations, the cliff dwellers lived in the canyons, but by the end of the 13th century, they withdrew, never again to return. They drifted south and west. Tribal traditions of the Tiwa, the Hopi, and the Zuni Indians of New Mexico and Arizona tell about the great migrations from the north. And now we come to the story of A.E. Douglas, an astronomer out of Flagstaff, Arizona. Douglas was infatuated with the Anasazi, and he wanted to learn more about them. On his summer vacations, he traveled by Model T to the sites in the 1920s. One day, he cut down a bristlecone pine, one of the oldest living things in the world, and he began to count the tree rings. Douglas believed that when the rings were farther apart, that indicated a good rain year and the tree grew more. When the rings were close together, a bad rain year, and the tree only grew a little. In counting back the tree rings, Douglas found that from 1272 to 1299, there had been a 27-year drought at Mesa Verde and the Four Corners area because the rings were close together. Douglas then concluded that the people of Mesa Verde left in 1299 because of the 27-year drought. He had come up with a new term in the English dictionary, dendrochronology, or the study of the tree rings. However, Douglas had only found out about a 27-year drought. That didn't necessarily mean that the natives left because of it. However, later, because of carbon-14 testing, and that involves the amount of radiation emitted by carbon-14, which diminishes at a regular rate once an organism dies, that measures the amount of radiation present in the bones, and it can tell the approximate date of death, carbon-14 testing. In the carbon-14 testing of bones at Mesa Verde, practically none dated after 1299. So because of the tree rings of Douglas and carbon-14 testing, we know that the natives of Mesa Verde were gone by the year 1299. No one really knows why the people of Mesa Verde left. The drought is the best guess. They also might have thought that their gods had deserted them with that long drought. Overpopulation and the degradation of the land are other theories. For the first but not the last time in Colorado, humans and the environment had clashed, with the environment the ultimate winner. By the end of the 14th century, the Mesa Verde pueblos had become ghost towns, fields overgrown with sagebrush. With inhabitants gone, structures suffered the ravages of wind and rain and began to decay. For a few generations, people knew why their ancestors had left southwestern Colorado. But then after the great-grandparents and the grandparents and the parents died, the story was lost in the recesses of time. Ute Indians controlled the Mesa Verde area long after the natives left. They were aware of the ruins, but they paid little attention to them. Then came miners into the region in the late 1850s and the early 60s. And one of them, John Moss of the La Plata region, not far from Durango, became aware of some of the ruins as he looked for gold. He told Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden, one of the great surveyors of the American West, about them. In the 1870s, Hayden visited some of the ruins, not the great ones, but some of them. And he had the greatest photographer in the history of the West with him, William H. Jackson. And Jackson took photos, but he and Hayden did not see the greatest structures. Now it is a bitterly cold December day in 1888, and two cowboys, Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason, were rounding up stray cattle above the Mancos River. It was a lousy day, recounted Wetherill. Snowing, sleeting, raining, wind blowing, visibility zilch. And then as the cowboys peered down a canyon looking for those cows, miraculously the clouds parted. It was almost as if God parted the clouds and a ray of sunshine shot down that canyon. And when that occurred, Mason and Wetherill became the first white men to look down on the Cliff Palace and become aware of a great and ancient civilization. They made their way down the steep ravine with their lariats and ropes. And inside the buildings, they found clay pots, stone axes, several skeletons, and other artifacts. With Mesa Verde now discovered, people came into the area paying little regard for the artifacts of that great civilization and destroying them. Then came Baron Gustav Nordenskjöld, an archaeologist from Scandinavia. He rescued 1,100 of the top artifacts and took them to the University of Helsinki in Finland. And as he put it, keeping the ruins from being ruined. You want to see those great artifacts today from Mesa Verde, you got to go to Helsinki. In 1906, Mesa Verde became a national park and was protected. Only 10% of that ancient civilization ruins are open to the public, and today hundreds of thousands of people visit the site. The departures from Mesa Verde were orderly. All took place in the late 13th century. All gave evidence of being agreed upon. Houses were left standing. Rooms were neat and emptied of possessions needed for travel. Food bins were bare. The dead were left in peaceful burial. Few personal objects were left behind. Fires died in their proper places. Sudden natural calamity, earthquake, flood, lightning, set holocaust, played no part. The people left no record and carried none with them. Perhaps for a few generations, the story was told, until gradually it was lost in the recesses of time. The only record to be consulted is the one of the natural world, and it is vague and disputed. At a time when other Indians of the Americas and the present U.S. huddled under fragile shelters of skin and bark, the Anasazi built massive apartments of sandstone, while others wandered endlessly, hunting and gathering a precarious existence. They were planting and harvesting tilled fields. Yet their civilization lacked the durability of their buildings. And eventually, the people of Mesa Verde abandoned their homeland and their way of life forever. Today, the U.S. preserves that great prehistoric civilization deep in the canyons of Colorado. Following the Mesa Verde Indians by a couple of hundred years were nomadic Native Americans in what would become Colorado. The high country was the domain of the Ute Indians. They were divided up into three groups. The northern Utes of northwestern Colorado around Meeker and the White River. The Uncompahgre Utes of the Gunnison country and the Uncompahgre Valley. And the southern Utes in southwestern Colorado near Toywalk and Mancos and Cortez. The plains in eastern Colorado between the South Platte River in the north and the Arkansas River in the south were controlled by the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. Below the Arkansas River in southeastern Colorado were the Kiowa. The Indians of Colorado were nomadic, had well-defined boundaries, fought with each other, depended entirely on the buffalo, and competed very well with nature. Ultimately, however, the killing of the buffalo by whites, westward expansion, feuds between the different tribes, and white man's diseases led to their downfall. And now we come to Spain, early the #1 nation in the world, and now it cast its eyes on Colorado. From the time of Columbus in 1492, Spain had taken the lead in colonization in the New World. Ponce de Leon looking for the fountain of youth in Florida. Vasco Balboa getting to the Pacific Ocean. Hernando Cortez taking the great Aztec Indian civilization from 1519 to 21. And Francisco Pizarro taking over the Incas in Peru in 1533 to 35 showed the depth of their conquest. Very early, Spain had heard the stories of the 7 cities of gold, the Gran Quivira, the El Dorado, which supposedly existed somewhere in America. Hernando de Soto and Francisco Coronado led expeditions looking for those cities in present-day United States. If there was gold in Mexico at the great area of Zacatecas, there had to be gold further north in the mountains, Spain thought. Spain became interested in what later on would be called Colorado for the following reasons. #1 and most important, they were looking for gold. #2, they were trying to find a good trail to unite their mission stations in New Mexico with their mission stations in California, 24 of them, which existed from San Diego to San Francisco along a great highway called the El Camino Real, or the Royal Road, each one of the mission stations 1 day's ride apart. #3, they were interested in converting the Indians to Christianity. And finally, they were interested in trapping the beaver, black gold, each beaver pelt worth $7. In 1598, the Spanish settled a little town in northern New Mexico called San Juan, the present site of Española. However, it was too far north of their supply lines. And as a result, 11 years later, in 1609, Spain settled a mission station in Santa Fe with Juan Oñate leading 250 men in. And there he is. Today, that is the oldest Spanish settlement in the West. And just behind Pensacola, 1560, and St. Augustine, 1585 in the United States. Spain treated the Native Americans horribly, leading one of their own writers, Bartholomew Las Casas, to write a scathing indictment of them in a great book called Tears of the Indians. As Spain came to the West in Colorado, they had competition from French fur traders coming in from Canada and the banks of the Mississippi River. In Canada, they were called the Coeurs de Bois, the Knights of the Wilderness. And they came into the Great Lakes area and then down the Mississippi with one fur trading post after another. If you're in Minnesota, St. Paul and Faribault. If you're in Wisconsin, Eau Claire, Fond du Lac, La Crosse. If you're in Iowa, Des Moines and Prairie du Chien. If you're in Missouri, Normandy and St. Louis and Cape Girardeau. And if you're in New Orleans, you're in Shreveport, Lake Charles, Baton Rouge. These are all great French fur trading posts. And they now challenge Spain for supremacy in an area that would always be known later on as the Louisiana Purchase. The French fur traders ventured into Colorado in the north, along a river they call the Cache la Poudre, hiding the Powder River near today's Fort Collins, and the South Platte, a French term meaning flat. In 1765, the Spaniard Don Juan Rivera led an exploring party from Santa Fe along the San Juan Mountains to the Gunnison River in search of gold. He and his men carved their names on a tree near present-day Delta. In July of 1776, 2 Franciscan priests, Francisco Dominguez and Silvestre Escalante, and 8 other men headed west in an effort to find a good overland route to California. The expedition made its way through western Colorado, then to the Great Salt Lake, where heavy snow and cold weather forced the return back to Santa Fe by January of 1777. However, the two padres had led the first white expedition through some of the most treacherous terrain in America and gave Spain a claim to the region. In the year 1779, Juan Baptiste de Anza, one of the greatest men in the history of the American continent, along with the great Scottish fur trader, Alexander Mackenzie, and the great Russian Alexander Baranov, Anza had founded San Francisco and blazed a 1,000-mile Anza road from Mexico to San Francisco. He is now the governor of Santa Fe, and he went after the Comanche Indians who were causing all kinds of trouble in Spain's mission stations. With 573 men, he went north out of Santa Fe, depopulating Santa Fe to the San Luis Valley, crossed Pancha Pass, South Park, and he found the Indians finally with their great chief, Cuerno Verde, which means greenhorn, for the greenhorns that came out of his battle dress, right between Gardner and Rye in southern Colorado, and defeated them in the Battle of Greenhorn, ending Comanche interest in Colorado. From the 1500s to 1806, Spain tried to get settlements in Colorado, but never did. They settled in Texas with San Antonio and San Saba, in New Mexico with Santa Fe and Taos, in California with mission stations like San Diego and San Francisco and San Luis Obispo and Santa Monica, and in Arizona with Tucson and Tubac, but not in Colorado. The reasons why they never had a permanent settlement in Colorado were the following. Number one, probably most importantly, they never found gold. Secondly, the Indians were very difficult and hard to control. Thirdly, Colorado was too far away from supply lines in Mexico City. And number four, the mountains and the weather were very difficult. However, the Northern mystery remained, and stories continue to be told about the 7 golden cities, Indians who shot golden bullets and lost Spanish gold mines. In the year 1932, a professor from Cal Berkeley, Herbert Eugene Bolton, gave a 12-page paper to the American Historical Association meeting in Chicago. And the title of that paper was called The Epic of Greater America, which became famous and told a lot about Spain and the American continent. Bolton declared that anyone who lived on the American continent was an American. So if you're in Alaska, the United States, Mexico, Argentina, you were an American. And everybody in America, he said, had a common history. And here is what all Americans had in common, and I'm excluding the natives now who are already here. Number one, he said, all who came to America were Christian, one religion. Number two, all who came to America were from Europe, one area. Number three, all who came to America enslaved the natives. The English had slavery. The Portuguese had the encomienda. The Dutch had the patroon system, and Spain had the mission station. Number four, all who came to America had to adapt to a strange environment which changed them. The Argentine Pampas, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, the Andes, the Sierra Madre, the frozen north of Alaska and northern Canada, the Yukon. And number five, he said, all who came to America were influenced by external European events. The old adage was, if Europe sneezed, America caught cold. Edgar Allan Poe, the great writer of the United States, wrote a tremendous poem about Spain's quest for gold in Colorado, and it was called El Dorado. And I'm going to read it. gaily bedight a gallant knight, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long, singing a song in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell as he found no plot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land called El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow. Ride boldly, ride, the shadow replied, if you seek for El Dorado. The great poem El Dorado by Edgar Allan Poe. Today, out of 700 place names in Colorado, 170 are Hispanic. Alamosa, Rio Grande del Norte, Sangre de Cristo, Huérfano, La Junta, San Juan, San Miguel. Spain has left Colorado its philology, the folk spirit of a people, their language, their art, their architecture, their religion, their music, and their dances, the fandango. I personally love mariachi bands. Spain left us the best of their civilization and had an enormous impact on Colorado. So there it is. Mesa Verde, the Ute Indians, and Spain. And now, a little reminder before we go to the trivia question, and Ashley will tell you how to answer. This is for the alums. A reminder that Western's homecoming is October 8th to the 10th. We look forward to seeing all of you alums back on campus. And also as part of homecoming, there's a grand opening of the Paul Rady Computer Engineering Building. That's Friday, October the 8th at 6 p.m. And now Ashley's going to tell you how to answer the trivia question for the book.
So just as last week, please, everybody, put your answers in the chat box and just give some time. This week, I'm going to go back and look before I give a final answer just to make sure everyone did answer. So be patient. Thank you so much.
And it's first come, first serve, and then any questions that anybody has, I'll be happy to try to answer. So here we go on the trivia question. 2 parts. Number 1, I want the name of the man who came up with the tree ring theory, and I want the name of the theory, the new word in the English dictionary. We await the answer. The name of the man who came up with the tree ring theory and the name of the theory.
I have dendrochronology, William H. Jackson from Jennifer.
You got half of it, but not the correct one. Dendrochronology and Douglas Suzanne Hetz.
Yep.
Has got it. Suzanne, congratulations.
Suzanne, if you can just email me at curator@crestedbuttemuseum.com, all of your information, then I'll pass it on to Duane.
Yeah, I'll give the address. Now, are there any questions or comments on tonight's presentation? Next week's going to be a dandy. We're going to talk about the exciting mountain men, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson. Some of you have seen the movie Revenant. Some have seen Robert Redford and Jeremiah Jackson. Any comments? Ashley is just putting up her email address right now for Suzanne. Any questions on the presentation? Hi, Jack. Thanks for checking in. Or comments, just check in with me. That's great. Kevin, thank you. I hope the trip up to Italian Mountain went well.
Oh, there's a question from Suzanne. What gave the Finnish guy the standing to raid all of those artifacts?
Well, he was the only guy in the area. Nobody paid much attention to him because nobody thought this was very important at the time. So he was able to do anything he wanted.
Well then.
Thank you, Judy.
Carol says, Willa Cather's book, The Professor's House, is a great read that incorporates the discovery of Mesa Verde. And I have read that book and it is very good.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, Willa Cather is one of my favorite authors. Her famous comment was, the end is nothing. The journey is all. Any other questions?
Yeah, Patricia says, where are the pictographs from? Or
The pictographs are over at Chaco Canyon, near Chaco Canyon. Yeah, thanks, Brenda. Pete, put your posting again.
I have Kay Gentry. Kay Gentry asks, what is the name of your book, in quotations, Around the River? What's the full name?
Yeah, the name of the book is Around the Gunnison Country. Yeah, that's probably the one you're thinking of.
Douglas says, we underestimate the influence of the Spanish. Are there treasures at Chalk Cliffs?
Well, there's a lot of people who have looked for treasures there, but nobody's ever found them. I'm sure there are. You know, you're exactly right, Doug. Spain had a tremendous impact on the New World. You know, South Central America, certainly, if they had treated the Native Americans better, they might have won. France did. I might mention Pete Dundas on board, and one of our sessions a little later, and we want everybody tapping their shoes. Pete will be with me at the museum, and we are going to be playing polkas. Gary, I have not been to see the artifacts. Have you? There's 1,100 of them there. Any other questions or comments?
Danita has a question. Has there been any effort to get the artifacts back to the United States?
I don't think so. I think that they're pretty much permanently over there.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, then we are going to end this session. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Don't forget to join in next week at 7 p.m. And just want to give thank you to our supporters, the Western Colorado University Foundation and Bill Petros.
Yeah, leave it.